Hang Gliding Flight School is a free educational resource created to share the fun and adventure of flying by encouraging, teaching, and inspiring aviators of all ages. Aviation videos provide a supplement, never a replacement, for face-to-face, in-person training with qualified teachers. Visit www.hangglidingflightschool.com for a map of nearly 40 flight instructors in the USA.
Good day, aviators, and welcome to another episode of Hang Gliding Flight School. My name is Eric, and this episode of Hang Gliding Flight School is going to be the ultimate guide to hang gliding helmets. Now, in addition to being a hang glider pilot, I'm also a motorcyclist, a BMX racer, and a skateboarder. So, I own a lot of different helmets for a lot of different sports, and I've done a great deal of research into helmet technology to find the most optimal helmets for each sport. Now, this is actually a skateboarding helmet, not a hang glider helmet. But a good skateboarding helmet like this provides great protection for low altitude training flights in hang gliding. So this video isn't going to teach you about brands or models or review specific helmets. Instead, this video is going to teach you the basics of helmet technology so you can make an educated decision about which helmet works best for you.
There's an old saying I've always loved: helmets should only be worn by people who own brains worth protecting. And you probably know who you are.
By the time you finish this video, your brain should know some of the history of helmets, what to look for in buying one, and why the helmet industry is a little disingenuous and doesn't really tell you enough about their products.
The history of helmets is very interesting because for thousands of years, helmets were made of metal and served one purpose: to protect warriors in battle. As 20th century sports and construction evolved, so did helmet technology. We began building structures which required hard hats. We began racing motorcycles and doing aggressive skiing. We invented hang gliding, skateboarding, and motocross. People started to kayak down whitewater rapids. And because of all these sports, human beings needed a huge array of specialized helmets for all these different sporting activities. It's fascinating to realize average people have only been wearing helmets for about 100 years. And for thousands of years before that, helmets always looked like this.
Now here's an interesting question that might not be as easy to answer as you think. Could manufacturers design a helmet that is almost foolproof and will protect you from any head injury under any impact? Yes. See, it's kind of a trick question. So we tend to think, well, no, in a very severe or awkward fall, you could injure your head with any helmet.
But, hypothetically, let's just suppose that somebody had a really huge helmet on their head, right? No bigger than that. Like a helmet that's like 3 feet in diameter, right? Yes, like that, okay? Let's suppose you had a helmet that was that big and you fell off your bicycle. Would you hurt your head? No, of course not. You could get hit with a baseball bat or a semi-truck and you wouldn't feel a thing if you had a helmet that huge. But if you had a helmet that big, you might have a really bad neck injury because the helmet would be so heavy.
That is the challenge faced by helmet designers. How to make a helmet strong enough to absorb a severe impact, yet small and lightweight enough to be comfortable and prevent neck injuries.
Riding a motorcycle, you're not exerting yourself so you can afford to wear a helmet that's slightly heavier. If you're racing BMX, you're going to want a much lighter helmet since you're not moving at speeds that are as fast as a motorcycle and you're exerting yourself a lot more. When you're sword fighting in the Society for Creative Anachronism, you want an extremely heavy steel medieval helmet so that when you get thwacked in the head with a sword, the helmet can absorb that impact and all of that inertia. But if you're a hang glider pilot and you're flying prone and you're looking up and craning your neck, you're going to want a very lightweight helmet. So the parameters of your sport are really going to change what you're looking for in a helmet. Even in the Middle Ages, armorers began to realize that helmets required layers and liners and padding, both for comfort and for safety.
All modern helmets have the same basic design of layers. There is a hard outer shell. There is a thick layer of closed cell foam There's a thin layer of open cell foam, and many helmets are starting to add a fourth layer called a rotational impact mitigation, or RIM system.
Let's take a closer look at each of those layers. First, there's an outer shell, which is typically constructed of one of 5 materials. ABS plastic, which stands for acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. Now, this is the cheapest and weakest form used in plastic shells and is usually used on bicycle helmets or children's helmets. Next, we have ABS PC. The PC stands for polycarbonate. Now, this is a stronger plastic blend, but it's fairly rare. Not many helmets are made of ABS PC. Next, we have just plain old PC polycarbonate helmets. And polycarbonate is a very strong plastic, and it's pretty common on more inexpensive motorcycle helmets. Next, we have fiberglass. Now, fiberglass is usually only seen in motocross or motorcycle helmets. Although there are exceptions to that. For example, my green BMX helmet is actually made of a fiberglass shell, which is pretty cool because, like I said, it's not really common to use fiberglass on BMX helmets. And then finally, we have carbon fiber shells, and carbon fiber is lighter and stronger than fiberglass, and again, it's usually only used in motocross or motorcycling. Next is the closed cell foam layer. Closed cell foam is usually black, and it looks a lot like styrofoam. However, the foam used in helmets is much stronger than ordinary styrofoam. Styrofoam coolers and insulation is made of a material called extruded polystyrene foam, or XPS. But the closed cell foam in helmets is made from one of 2 much stronger materials. It is either expanded polystyrene, which is EPS foam, or expanded polypropylene, which is EPP foam. EPP is more springy and elastic and can rebound in shape after an impact. EPS foam is more brittle and used on cheaper helmets, although EPS still passes safety standards and offers good protection. This layer is what absorbs most of the impact in hard collisions. Next, we have the open cell padding. The open cell padding in most helmets offers very little protection and is mostly there for fit. S1 helmets actually offers various thicknesses of open cell pads to allow athletes to fit the helmet perfectly to their head. Now, most BMX and motorcycle helmets use really nice open cell padding which is sewn together and encased in fabric. The cheaper helmets usually just glue a little bit of fabric to the foam, but whether it's fancier motorcycle pads or simple skateboarding pads, this layer is still open cell foam. Now, there are a few skateboarding helmets which are not certified to any safety standards, which do not have any closed cell foam, such as the ProTech Classic Skate and the famous Flyaway helmets by Kanoa Surf. These 2 helmets just use extremely thick layers of open cell foam instead. And finally, we get to the rim system. Many helmet manufacturers are also developing systems to mitigate the rotational forces on the brain during an impact. As you know from basic grade school biology class, the human brain floats inside the skull encased in a liquid. And upon an impact to the skull, this brain fluid allows the brain to rotate within the skull, thereby dispersing some of the impact energy and protecting the brain from damage. Rim systems in helmets are designed to mimic this biological behavior by allowing the outer shell of the helmet to slightly rotate, separate from the inner shell, upon a glancing impact. The first company to do this was a Swedish company, and they called their system MIPS, which stands for Multidirectional Impact Protection System. Now, since the introduction of the MIPS system, many other companies have created competing technologies. For example, there is a company in Oregon called WaveCell, and WaveCell is producing their own version of a rim system for helmet technology. There's also a company in Monaco called Koroyd, developing their own system. Now, MIPS, WaveCell, and Koroyd all license their technology to other helmet manufacturers, while some helmet manufacturers are developing their own proprietary rim systems, such as Fluid Inside by Fox, Spin by POC, ODS by 6D Helmets, Smart Shock by 100% Helmets, AIS by Fly Racing, Spherical by Giro Helmets, and Turbine by Liat. So to summarize, all of these brand names are simply different rim systems. Slightly different technologies, but they're all basically doing the same thing. So now you know all about the different layers of a helmet, and we can move on to learning how helmets are certified.
As you probably already know, helmets have certification labels inside of them, indicating that that make and model of helmet has undergone and passed a safety test. But what exactly are those tests? Different nations around the world have different minimum safety standards, and different types of helmets undergo different tests.
Let's take a look at those testing standards and see how the tests are conducted. Helmets are tested by dropping them from various heights onto different angled surfaces and measuring the G-force transferred to an artificial skull within the helmet. 400 Gs can cause permanent injury, while 300 Gs is enough to knock you unconscious and cause temporary injury. Now, that's a little oversimplified. There's a lot more to the testing process, but for the most part, that's how the testing is conducted.
When a helmet manufacturer passes one of these tests, they're not obligated to publish any of the test results. Each helmet simply receives a pass or fail. But none of the certification stickers reveal details like how much energy the helmet absorbed.
This helmet company in Australia called Anti-Ordinary, they really call out the helmet industry on this issue, where it says right here, how do we stack up to the industry? Well, we can't say because no other helmet company releases their drop test data. And if we come down here, we can see that they've actually released all of their test data showing what the impact G-forces were on their helmets. But the other thing that you could find kind of interesting is right here, the lab report states we're not allowed to show this full report to the public, which of course is a little bit weird, right? It's like, hey, these guys paid for a report, but the company that did the report won't let them tell the public what's in it. It's admirable for Anti-Ordinary to expose this sort of thing and to publish their test results. The only other helmet company that I know of who does that is S1 Helmets here in California. They did a really interesting test which shows the old school Kanoa flyaway helmet with soft foam actually offers excellent protection in extremely low impacts. But their multi-certified S1 Lifer helmet works much better at higher impacts. I really respect S1 and Anti-Ordinary for revealing this test information. Printing these test results on helmet packaging should become the industry standard. And I'm not saying that helmet manufacturers should be forced to do this. I'm not saying it should be regulated. I'm saying that a reputable, ethical helmet manufacturer should want to do this voluntarily. So remember, when you see these stickers inside of a helmet, these are pass-fail tests. But
when you see these stickers in the helmet, you know that the helmet met the standard, but you have no idea how well it actually performed relative to competing helmets. For example, let's suppose you have a helmet brand A, which sells for $500, and helmet brand B, which sells for $150. Both of these helmets earned CPSC certification labels inside them. And meeting the CPSC safety requirement means they had to transfer less than 300 Gs to the test skull. So it turns out the $500 helmet passed with 290 Gs, while the $150 helmet passed with 170 Gs. So the $150 helmet will protect you better than the $500 one. But as consumers, we have no way of knowing the $150 helmet is better because these test results are kept secret.
So this chart shows a variety of testing standards and their details. And by the way, this chart is also going to be really hard to read if you're not like full screen on a big television or a monitor. So if you're watching this video on your phone or something, like, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to see anything, but but on a big full screen, it should look fine. So on the right-hand side, we see the shapes the helmets are dropped onto, from what height they are dropped, and how many times the drop is done. Now, if you start to study these statistics, you can see, for example, the Snell motorcycle standard is far more stringent than the DOT motorcycle standard, because the Snell standard drops the helmet from a greater height and requires a lower G-force to pass. You can also see mountain bike helmets are clearly tested harder than ordinary BMX helmets, since they have the same G-force requirements, but mountain bike helmets are tested from a greater height and multiple times on the flat surface. However, sometimes it's not as easy to tell which standard is more stringent. For example, the CPSC standard versus the EN 1078 standard. EN 1078 requires a lower G-force, but CPSC drops the helmet from a greater height. Does that height compensate for the higher G-forces, thereby making the standards about equal? I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not sure how big a difference those G-forces are, and I'm not an engineer, so I'm not sure if an extra few inches makes an exponential difference in the G-forces or only a minor one. But using this chart, you can at least start to understand what the tests are checking. Now, one thing I find very interesting is the Snell B95 standard. You notice their test requirements allow the drop test to be done 1 to 3 times. And again, these results are never made public. So it's possible a helmet may endure this test with 3 drops and pass, while another model of helmet only elected to do 1 drop, and it could still get a passing mark. You will notice that most of the European standards have much lower G-force thresholds, which is good, but it's not necessarily better if the test is conducted from a lower height. Finally, let's look at the very bottom of the chart to see the standards for air sports helmets. Everyone from skydivers to hang glider pilots use air sports helmets, but as you can see, EN 966 is one of the lowest and worst standards of them all. In fact, only the European standard for skiing is worse. EN 966 only tests 2 drops from a very low height. Even an ordinary United States bicycle helmet is tested harder than the air sports standard. This is why a lot of educated pilots don't even waste their time with air sports helmets, and they choose to use helmets from other sports like downhill mountain biking or an e-bike helmet, which provide much better protection. Finally, let's talk about sizing a helmet, okay? Because this is something that people don't really explain to you. Like, there's tons of information and videos that tell you how to size a helmet, but what they never tell you is, well, what do you do if you're like a weird size, right? So you measure your head, and let's say you're kind of in between a medium and a large, right? So you don't really know which helmet you should get. In that case, always go with the bigger helmet, okay? Now, ideally, your helmet should fit you perfectly, but it's a lot better for the helmet to be slightly too big instead of slightly too small. Because if your helmet is slightly too small, well, there's really nothing you can do about it, right? You put it on your head and it's super tight and you get all these pressure points and it's painful. You start to get a headache and there's nothing you can do to fix it. But if your helmet is slightly too large, well, then you might be able to buy thicker padding. You could just, put on a bandana and that might be enough to sort of take up the slack and make it fit nice. So that's what you should do if you're in one of those sort of in-between sizes. Always go with the bigger helmet because although you do want a perfect fit, it's preferable to be slightly too large because you can fix that, as opposed to slightly too small, which you can't fix.
In conclusion, what kind of helmet do I like to have? Well, I look for three things. First, I like to find a helmet with multiple certifications. Not because that makes the helmet safer, but because it shows the manufacturer has faith in their helmet. Remember, the testing process is expensive and time-consuming. Manufacturers have to pay for every single test. So, I may be wrong, but I figure the more certifications a manufacturer gets, the more confidence they have in their product. And second, I try to get helmets with some kind of rim system. I really don't care about the brand or the type of rim system, but I do think rim systems are an effective technology. And finally, I try to find the most affordable, certified helmets I can. Since there's no way of knowing the true quality of the protection, and I know for a fact a certified $500 helmet isn't guaranteed to offer better protection than a $150 helmet certified to the same standard, I just go with the $150 one. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Hang Gliding Flight School. I hope all of this was helpful and you now know more about helmets than you ever knew before. Be sure to check the Hang Gliding Flight School website to find a worldwide map of nearby instructors who will train you to become a hang glider pilot. And remember, my friends, in the words of Ray Bradbury, you've got to jump off cliffs all the time and build your wings on the way down.